Hello, everybody. Hope you guys are enjoying your day. Today, we're going to be looking at a potential Arctic blast, which is going to be making its way through the eastern two-thirds of the United States. And this is going to be providing some very dry conditions as well as some very, very cold conditions, record-breaking cold here. And this is going to be potentially 10 degrees off of your record, your previous record. So it's going to be very, very cold. You're also probably going to set some late-season snowfall records over parts of the Northeast and parts of the even the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes, and it's gonna be really just a very very winter-like day. It's almost gonna feel like early March, mid-March on a cold early March day instead of a May day. We're already into May, and it should be very warm by this point, but we're getting into these very very chilly, cold conditions, which are gonna be making its way all the way down the eastern United States. So let's start off here with your National Weather Service here, and we have some red flag warnings in place for New Mexico, Texas, and Colorado there. We also have some excessive heat warnings for parts of southern Arizona and southern California. As well, for southern California, we have some heat watches in place. We could have some temperatures around 95 to 105 degrees. Red flag warnings for the southern half of Florida. Yesterday, you saw those red flag warnings more for the Gulf Coast region, but now it's moved further down into Florida. And you have seen actually a couple of wildfires just because of this Arctic blast that's leading to actually some very, very dry conditions. You have dew points that are in the 30s and the 40s, which is very, very dry dew points for Florida standards. And that is going to lead, if you get a little bit of a wind or a gust, you might actually see some fires definitely be able to spread a little bit easier. We have some frost advisories in effect for Nebraska as well as a little bit of Idaho there. And then we have some freeze warnings in those darker shade of blues over parts of the upper Midwest through the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley, as well as even parts of the interior Northeast. And these are going to be extended all the way through the rest of the Northeast, and they might actually be extended a bit further south here. And then kind of enveloping that, you see some freeze watches in effect for that lightest blue area over parts of the Great Lakes and into the Ohio Valley, and then kind of up the spine of the Appalachian Mountains. So let's go into why this is happening. Now, this is looking a couple thousand feet above our heads here, and this isn't even too far above our heads here, probably 3 to 5 thousand feet above our heads, and we're seeing this is in Celsius here, so it is going to be a bit chillier in Fahrenheit, and we're seeing we have anywhere in those kind of darkest shade of blues, almost into the grays. That's where you're seeing about negative 10 degrees Celsius, which is about, I would say, about 10 degrees Fahrenheit, nearing the 0 degree mark in Fahrenheit. And what I really want to point out, look at this Arctic connection, which you've really lacked all winter because you've had this bottled up cold air in the Arctic circles. You had a record sea ice extent. You had the most sea ice extent since 2012, I believe. You've also had a record cold winter in parts of Alaska and northern Canada. So it has been a very, very cold winter in those areas, and that's because that polar vortex where that very cold air was is just bottled up there. And now it's been kind of strengthening all winter. If you looked at this a couple months ago, probably in February, you had this very, very strong polar vortex, and now what that's enabling this upper air pattern to do is bring all this cold air kind of south, and that's allowing a very, very cold Arctic plunge. If you took these temperature anomalies from what they are right now, and I'll pull up your temperature anomalies right now, if you took these temperature anomalies and you put them for your January temperatures, you would have a lot of below zero temperatures and single digit temperatures, even for the coastal Northeast, through the mid-Atlantic, even through parts of the Ohio Valley and the Great Lakes, and especially into the interior Northeast. These are very, very cold temperatures, and look at these departures from normal. This is about 10 to as much as 30 degrees lower than what you're supposed to be at for this time of year. Look at this all throughout the Northeast. You're seeing this very, very cold pattern in place. Now, what does this equal in terms of your low temperatures? Now, this is going to be mainly going to be at its height through Friday and through Saturday, and Friday night into Saturday, that's when you're seeing potentially that snow threat, which we'll talk about in just 1 second. Now, these are your minimum temperatures or your low temperatures for Saturday, May 9th. And you're seeing we actually have some very, very cold conditions here. We have some 20s being indicated, and then as you get further to the coast, where you do get some of that relief from the oceans, which your oceans are also very, very cold. Your ocean temperatures are right around 40 degrees for many of these areas. So it has been very, very cold, and you have some very, very cold temperatures because of that. You have temperatures that are around the coastal areas, right around the mid and lower 30s. Just inland, you're getting into the 20s here, and even a couple teens, definitely not out of the question. And especially as you add this wind gust that we're going to be seeing. Look at this wind gust. We're going to be seeing wind gusts because you have this very, very tight pressure gradient. You're going to have wind gusts that are going to be exceeding 40 miles per hour all the way through parts of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, upstate New York, through New Jersey and Pennsylvania, as well as Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. All these areas are going to see some very, very windy conditions here, and it's really going to be at its peak as you get through Saturday night, which is still going to be very cold by that point. If you mix in those, if you put those very, very windy conditions and those very cold temperatures together, your wind chills look something like this for Saturday morning, and you're seeing wind chills that are definitely going to be into the teens over the interior and northeast. Coastal areas closer to the coast, probably going to be within the mid and lower 20s, maybe some upper 20s as you get further south, but it's still going to feel very, very chilly. I don't think for many of the areas that if you live in the interior and northeast, you might actually get a bit of an accumulating snowfall. If you live somewhere further to the south, I think something that's going to be more impactful rather than this maybe these snow showers, which are going to be very, very late season snow showers. These are potentially going to tie some records and break some records as well. It's probably going to be the cold air that's going to be more of a factor, and that's something that you're probably going to be more surprised by. And I think that's going to shock a lot of people with how cold it is going to feel, especially because we should be in the 70s, 60s at this time of year for these areas, even 50s if you get a little bit further north. So it is a very chilly, chilly pattern that is going to be taking place over the Northeast and the Ohio Valley here. So here's your simulated radar from the NAM model, and this is your North American model, and this is kind of one of those colder solutions of this. So this is kind of, if you want snowfall, this is your best case scenario model, and I think it's doing a little bit too, it's being a little bit too much on the cold side. It's bringing this cold air a little bit further, far to the south, and what that's leading to is some snowfall potentially a little bit further to the south. So you see, this is going to be mainly by Friday night, getting into Saturday morning. You see, rain is going to be kind of starting here with some rain, and then you get into those higher elevations, and you might actually see a little bit of snow as we get through Friday night. And then what the NAM model, the North American model, wants to do is bring through the interior and northeast first, and wants to bring in some snowfall, trying to turn it over to snowfall. Now, how much is going to accumulate with this May sun? Most of it is going to melt within a couple of hours, maybe 30 minutes. It's going to be all done with because of that very, very high sun angle. But because this is happening at nighttime, you might actually get a bit of accumulation. You don't have to deal with that sun kind of melting it, and you don't really have to fight with the sun to get some accumulation. So in these higher elevations throughout parts of the mountainous areas of the Northeast, I think you could definitely see some snowfall through here that's going to accumulate as you get further, where you start to see this transition to snow, really as you get through the coastal areas of Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut. Maybe it'll coat your deck or on the top of your car, but I don't think it's going to stick for very long. Once that sun comes out, it's pretty much all going to be gone with, and you might not even have known if it did snow overnight or not, because it'll probably be melted by the time you wake up. Now, you do see some of these snow showers come through parts of southern Pennsylvania, parts of New Jersey, and through the coastal areas of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. That is probably a bit overdone, I think, and I'll show you what the NAM is putting out, what the European model is putting out in terms of snowfall, and also what the National Weather Service is putting out, so you can kind of formulate consensus of what is going to actually happen here. And then you see the NAM really takes this a very, very southern track low. It's kind of taking this system and kind of dragging it southward because the NAM wants to put out a lot of cold air, and you see this a lot with the NAM model. It does put out a lot of this very cold air. It likes to push more cold air into many of these model runs. So you have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, and then you see it move up the coast, and it does. You kind of do see, because of those very windy conditions, you see some lake effect rain and snow showers, which usually you don't see in May either. But because of this very chilly and windy pattern, you will actually potentially see that come into place throughout parts of the Northeast. Now, let's look at your total snowfall from what the NAM 12 cam model is putting out. We'll go through the full 60 hours to add some of that lake effect. You see, highest elevations, yeah, you could do pretty good. You could see potentially 2 to 4 inches of snowfall. Higher elevations in Maine, the NAM 12 cam model, or the European model, is actually putting out 6+ inches over many areas in Maine, and I actually think that's going to happen. It also agrees with the National Weather Service forecast, which we'll show you to you in 1 minute. Now, here's the European model forecast, and I think the European model has a good handle on where this storm is going to track. Maybe a couple snow showers for this area, but I do think most of your accumulation, it's going to be north and west of the coastal areas, and I think the European model putting a little bit too much snowfall for those coastal areas in Maine and New Hampshire, but I do think it is going to be mainly, most of your accumulation is going to be in north and west, and it's going to be through Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, and maybe into upstate New York with some of those higher elevations. I think the European does overdo, though, those amounts in eastern Maine. I don't see a foot of snowfall out of this, and plus you're dealing with that sun angle as the sun comes out in the morning. It's probably not going to stick. Even if you do get 12 inches, you'll probably only be left with maybe 3 inches on the ground. Now, here's the National Weather Service forecast, and you see they really tapered off the amounts further to the east in eastern Maine, but they do have a good 1 to 2 inches, and anywhere in that lightest blue, that's where they're saying the first signs of an accumulation, and that's most likely just going to be overnight, and that's probably going to go away throughout the morning. But as you get into those 2-3 inch amount accumulations, that's where they're thinking it's probably actually going to stick for maybe a couple hours, and then as you get through northern Maine, northern New Hampshire, and then southern Vermont, those are some very, very mountainous regions, and that's where you're saying potentially 3 to 6 inches, maybe even a little bit more, over parts of Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont here. So it is going to be a very chilly pattern that is in effect, and definitely it is going to be something that you have to pay attention to, and it's going to be something that's going to be very, very unprecedented with these very chilly temperatures and all the snowfall that's happening very late in the season. Anyways, guys, that is going to wrap it up for today's video, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.